right. So I'm going to go ahead and talk about the goddess Inanna, right? Now, as early as the ancient Sumerians in the 4th millennium BCE, and Inanna, excuse me, was revered, often called the Lady of Heaven, and she was connected to sex and nature. Later on, amongst the Semitic peoples, she was known as Ishtar. And even though she's understood as the goddess of love, she was also known as the goddess of war. This is a power that she derived from her seduction of the god Enki when he was drunk at a banquet. And so she ended up with this honor. So it's interesting. So she's the goddess of love and war. This warlike characteristic was acquired around 2390 BCE when Semitic influence began to dominate Mesopotamia. Because of this, Inanna is a warlike goddess that is fond of battle. We'll see some illustrations of that today. It has a violent lust for power. She stands beside her favorite kings, side by side, shoulder to shoulder as they fight. Also, she's depicted as a great lioness. In fact, in old Babylonian literature, she is presented not just as a lioness, but as a moon lioness. Now, it must be remembered that while she was known as the goddess of love and sex, she was not, I repeat, she was not a goddess of marriage. Her overseeing the act of sex in and of itself was not connected to any sort of moralistic union of male and female. In fact, she was the goddess behind prostitution. Sumerian and Akkadian love songs invoke Inanna as the power behind love, specifically physical love, right? For all its potential potency. In Akkadian, this sexual potency is called kuzbu. So in our using English letters, K-U-Z-B-U, kuzbu, which can be best described as meaning a certain amount of allure. While she entices her lovers to embrace, to have sex, she does not encourage them to marry and to form any kind of commitment. So again, this must be kept in mind. With that said, Inanna is still related to something that's called sacred marriage, but that's a whole other context that we're going to unpack, bringing the local king of Mesopotamia into a ritual marriage with the priestess of Inanna, which represented the marriage between the goddess Inanna and her lover Dumuzi. Now, while sex was involved, again, it was not really a marriage of any kind in the traditional sense, intended to cement the relationship through this ritual action between the king of the particular Mesopotamian city-state and the goddess, giving him legitimacy to rule with the natural benefits, ensuring that the soil would be fertile. And we'll go further into this as we proceed with this lecture. This Inanna, who the king was with, as the Muzi, or image to be dressed, to be jeweled. We don't know. Sometimes it was somebody who was within the temple itself. Sometimes somebody higher up, like a priestess. Sometimes the king's wife, and sometimes it was just simply a ritual act. There's quite a bit of diversity there. We go there. Moving right along, is often viewed as the goddess connected to the planet Venus. Again, as we go through this introduction, I want to make sure that you know that we're going to unpack every bit that I'm bringing up here, which of course is the morning and evening star, and was connected with, by the way, lions and birds too. Now, fruit trees were often planted in her elaborate gardens. So Inanna had various temples, and around it, you had these gardens full of fruit trees. In fact, it was believed that those who partook of the first fruits within these sacred gardens were viewed as being a part of and connecting with her sacred powers of fertility. Of course, the idea of fertility gardens, literally, of fruit trees around temples dedicated to a goddess of love, continues on in the ancient Middle East and moves into a goddess by the name of Aphrodite. Now, when it comes to the name, let's go through this. There's a few different possibilities. Well, we're gonna unpack this. Excuse me. Inanna is often understood as being derived from the Sumerian phrase Nin an Uk, which means lady of heaven. Nin meaning lady, and An meaning the sky. So, but however, with that said, the cuneiform sign for her does not conform very well with the sign for lady. In fact, it kind of comes off as Ina as opposed to Ning. And so some scholars will say that there isn't really any Sumerian etymology to the name. It doesn't come from the Sumerians. Other scholars say it does, and this is a point of disagreement. However, there seems to be more and more a movement towards the fact that Inanna was the name itself was brought in from somewhere else, and aspects of who she is, and that area, of course, is the region of Eastern Anatolia as well as northern Mesopotamia, and that it's connected to the Indo-European tradition. In fact, specifically to the Haran mother goddess. Now, the name of the Haran mother goddess, her name is Inanna. I want to say it one more time. Inanna. Now, can you see how it sounds like Inanna? Inanna, Inanna. Inanna, Hana. My dog is reacting to me saying that, so I'm going to stop saying that again. She's starting to growl. So I'm not going to say it too often, but there you have it. So anyway, this tradition, it goes back to back to the 2000s BCE, and the Haran culture. Most people recognize that kingdom of Mitanni, which thrived between 15 to 1300 BCE, it was a Haran culture as well. But anyway, Inanna, stop dog. I'm kind of afraid again to say it. The Haran culture also connects to Hittite culture, and we do have the story of Inanna. And it goes as follows. The story relates to after Elpinu, the god of farming, disappeared. Tarhut, also known as Tishub, the storm god, appeared to her, but she told him he needed to search for his son. So when Tarhut gave up the search for his son, Inanna sent a bee to look for his son, who indeed found him, stinging his hands and feet to strengthen and purify him. I kind of want to stop there. It's like the idea of it. It's like, wait, so we're going to receive purification from a bee who stings what? Well, it stings our hands and our feet. I don't know. I don't think that would feel very good. But moving right along, it was meant to purify him. And this bee also followed by wiping his eyes and feet with wax. In the Anatolian tradition, we know that bees are considered holy, and oftentimes vessels for the spirits and for the gods. And if you're familiar with the belief system of Artemis of the Ephesians, who is understood as the queen bee, there is a connection there, and she is also an ancient Anatolian goddess. So this is where some of these ideas come from. So anyway, Anna next told Tarhut that his son, after finding him, right, should marry the sea god's daughter by the name of Inanna. In fact, even paying the dowry. So what happens is, talking with Inanna, Anna then gave her both a husband and a land. But then Anna was told by the storm god's bee, because the storm god also has a bee, that Inanna disappeared. So now, not the son had disappeared, but the one he was supposed to marry, Inanna, disappeared. He had to deal with these disappearing gods. Worried, Anna she searches the entire world for her, and then she disappears herself. You can see there's little bits and pieces here. There's a feeling here of the story of Demeter and Persephone, right? Worried, what happens is she's looking for Inanna, who is supposed to marry, Telpinu. And what happens is, as she is gone and being angry over this disappearance, the nurturing aspect all over the world disappears. In fact, humans and animals alike are no longer watching their children, and cattle and sheep are not producing. So when this mother goddess disappears, not only are the animals not reproducing, but people just kind of gave up any sense of nurturing. So you can see that she's connected to the nurturing aspect. But what happens, though, is that after her anger subsides, having ascended into the dark earth, so she gives up her anger and she puts it into the earth. There's actually another version of this where she banishes her anger using what's called brushwood, and then permitting the vapor of the brushwood to cleanse her body. So in many ways, this is kind of like purification, right? Through incense, right? So anyway, she then returns again, full of joy, and immediately the nurturing aspects of the earth return again. And then, of course, the text breaks off. She appears to be talking maybe to the sun god and a war god about something, maybe Inanna. I'm assuming that Inanna is found. So I did tell you this story because this idea of the disappearing act that Anna does will directly connect to Inanna, because Inanna also is a goddess who disappears, just like the planet Venus disappears, 3 days out of each month. So anyway, we're kind of building here some context, and we're telling stories that most people don't know about. So what's the origins of the cult of Inanna? Where does it come from? Well, what we can tell, we go way back. The center of her cult turns out to be at a place known as Uruk, U-R-U-K. And from what's the supposed Uruk period of Mesopotamian history, this ranges around 4,000 to 3,100 BCE. Her primary temple of worship was located at Uruk, and it was known as Inanna. That was the name of it, Inanna. And it was once dedicated to the god An, A-N, who is the god of the sky, who happens to be Inanna's father. But eventually it becomes sacred to Inanna. There is actually a myth of Inanna and An that tells exactly how Inanna was able to gain this temple dedicated to An, the great sky god. So you're going to see here An, who was revered early on in Mesopotamian history by the Sumerians. He is going to be displaced, and Inanna is going to take that position from him in the place of Uruk. In fact, the myth begins with Inanna talking about her intent to take over the temple directly. It goes as follows. Inanna, I'm reading now from the text, came forth from heaven. The lady of heaven set her mind to capturing the great heavens. Inanna set her minds to capturing the great heavens, set her mind to capturing the great heavens from the breaking text of heaven. Youthful Uti, she set her mind to capturing the great heavens. It sounds like I said the same thing about 4 times, and I did. You're going to see this as I'm going through and I'm quoting from the Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets that are obviously translated into English here. You're going to see that they love the idea of repetition, and you're going to see the same phrases used over and over again, and that's just the reality. I'm not a broken record. Nothing has happened to me. Well, next she talks to her brother, and how this works is she laments the fact that the Inanna temple is not of their domain. The brother, of course, is Utu, and they resolve to secure it. And so here's what they say. Holy Inanna spoke to her brother, the hero, the youthful Utu. She says, my brother, I want to tell you something. Pay attention to my speech. I like that. This guy, you're telling his brother, you see this sometimes with siblings, right? It's like, I'm going to tell you something. Pay attention. You got to better listen to what I have to say. And he says as follows. Utu, my twin, I want to tell you something. Yes, she says it again. Pay attention to my speech. Yes, says that again. So she says it twice. Her brother, the hero, youthful Utu, answered Holy Inanna, saying, my sister, I swear an oath by the life of heaven. I swear by the life of the rainbow of heaven. I swear by the life of the throne. By my majesty, I will follow what my sister says to me. I will follow what Holy Inanna says to me. So it's agreed. He's going to follow what Holy Sister says. I will follow what my sister says to me. Yes, he says it again. Then the maiden Inanna answered her brother, the hero, the youthful Utu, and then she says something. And we lose this text. We don't know. All we know is it starts up with the words, my spouse has made love to me, has kissed me, I wanted, and then the text breaks off again. For him, and then the text breaks off again, but he did not give it to him. So I'm thinking here, and many scholars think that she tried to convince one of the gods to help her take this temple, and it didn't work, as you could see here. And so what happens is that with him, majestic An would not give him Inanna, with the Inanna temple. The heavens are ours, the earth is ours. Inanna should be captured from An after you have taken, break against the text again. Then, of course, what happens is, again, there's lots of breaks, and it says the evil wind, the south wind, is against me. The evil wind in Mesopotamia arises from the south. It is a bitter wind, and many Mesopotamian demons are connected. Spirits of the wind are connected specifically to the south wind and to the southwest wind, sometimes the southeast wind, the south. And so this was a realm of evil. These are the evil winds that still today crisscross Iraq from the same region, and Desert Storm and others had to deal with this wind, and the dust is everywhere, right? So this is an evil wind. It seems to stop her in the process. So the text becomes falls into fragments after this, but describes her going through the marshlands to try to reach this temple while being advised by a fisherman to tell her the best route. But the winds continue to move against her. It says here, the south wind rose up. The evil wind rose up. The fisherman states to her, says, "My lady, if you travel on the barge and he raises the south wind, that south wind, and he raises the evil wind, that evil wind, barges, small boats will sink in the marshes." So again, what's happening here is that the winds are blowing and there's danger that she's going to drown. Ultimately, she does reach Uruk and her father On, who apparently is working with this evil south wind to stop her. He is absolutely upset at her because he considers her very arrogant to attempt to capture this temple all by herself. Now, you're going to see this tendency constantly of Inanna, where she does something very rash, very in a strong way, or seems to be rash, calculated. Well, yeah, she does, because she ends up stuck in the underworld being dead. So yeah, so she does these kinds of actions that kind of throw you off. This is one. But because On is her father, it's like William Shatner there. Sorry. What happens is that he concedes and lets his daughter take this domain, take this temple in Uruk. And so the myth states, having heard these words, On slapped his thighs. I tell you, okay. His voice filled with sighs of grief. What has my child done? She has become greater than me. What has Inanna done? She has become greater than me, says it twice. From now on, the normal length of daylight becomes shorter, and the daylight converts to nighttime. From today, when the day's watch is 3 units long, daylight is equal to nighttime. So obviously, this is a time to mark an equinox, right? The transition going about. And you'll see the equinox is an important time, important festival. But did you guys notice On was the sky god? On at first was considered the superior god amongst the Mesopotamian civilization. But here now, Inanna is displacing and taking charge, and she is becoming supreme deity. And you're going to see a lot of this as I continue having this conversation here, right? And so the Inanna temple is given to Inanna, as On states. He says, you are able to capture Inanna. Inanna should be as firm as heaven. It should not be toppled. Its name should be the settlement of the land. Mankind, all the people should prostrate themselves before at her feet. And now under that sun and on that day, it was indeed so. And so there we go. And then the text ends with talking about her qualities and her powers. And of course, obviously, other aspects. They're mentioning the priest of Inanna. She secured it. Now Inanna speaks to the Inanna as the house that is the place of the lady, the goddess who has attained her triumphant position. And she declares, I have captured Inanna, meaning the temple, from On, because you are unmatched amongst the great princes. Maiden Inanna, praising you is magnificent. Okay, so there you have it. So Inanna and Uruk has now become all powerful, and she has captured this temple. Does this temple exist? Yes, it does. This is even despite, of course, obviously the mythology. I got to tell you that if you go to Uruk today, side of Uruk, you can find this Inanna, which is the house of heaven. It is the oldest temple that is preserved at the site of Uruk today. In fact, we look at level 5 in this complex. You will see that there is a mud brick construction with elaborate niche decorations. You have a 3-part temple, a central nave with 2 side aisles, and at the very end, you have what is understood to be a holy of holies, a special place that is dedicated to the sacred essence of Inanna. I find it's interesting that while some of it's made out of mud bricks, other materials like limestone is used as its foundation. And in fact, in the walls, they have pressed into the walls red, black, and yellow, white paint on stones, and it kind of forms like these geometrical patterns on the side. So it's a pretty large temple. Okay, so there you have it. But what I find is interesting, drum roll please, because we're going to talk about this a little bit further, is that the first examples of writing arrives from this area. That's right. We find at this temple complex that the first tablets bearing the first writing, and we find cylindrical seals, small tubes of stone, designs carved upon their cylindrical surface. I actually had a chance to hold one of these seals from ancient Mesopotamia, and actually roll it myself. And I have the image over there. I should show it to you later. So there you have it. So yeah. So here we go. Seal impressions dating from this period of 3,100 to 2,900 BCE reveal that this temple received gifts from various cities throughout Mesopotamia, dedicated to the cult of Inanna. At Uruk, we found that, so what's going to happen now is this temple dedicated to Inanna, the surrounding city-states will give all these offerings and gifts, and some of those seals that sealed some of these messages and dedications and so forth are found at the site. We know that this temple was revered early on. This is the center of the Inanna worship. Well, we also found something else that's important for understanding or deciphering Inanna, and that is the famous Uruk vase. I want to talk about the Uruk vase a little bit. It was discovered in 1933, 1934 by German archaeologists, and they looked at this. They found this huge vase. It was 3 feet and 1/4 inches tall, so basically 1 meter tall. This Uruk vase has 4 registers. So it has the lowest register, the lowest level, shows scenes of vegetation. Much of the vegetation was found in the Delta region. So you see this grain, reeds, and the Euphrates River is also included in this lower register. The next register up, so you're moving from plants, next register up are animals. They are all on side profile, inclusive of sheep and oxen. The third register up shows a procession of humans, all male, naked, and carrying tools for sacrifice, as well as offerings of fruit, as well as grain. And then at the very top register of this particular vase is a very interesting temple scene. And we find a female figure there with the goddess Inanna, as indicated by representations of 2 bundles of reeds behind her, which is meant to indicate the 2 twisted reeds of the doorpost. So, in fact, the symbol, one of the symbols for Inanna, a lot of people don't know this, is what is called the ring-headed doorpost. And so basically it looks like a pillar with a bundle, made of a bundle of reeds. And at the very end, there is this curve around it. There's a bundle. At the very end, there's a curve around it. And what happened is that this becomes the glyph that represents Inanna. So if you want to know symbol of Inanna, once again, it is this bundle of reeds with the ring at the very end. These reeds were used to build their homes. It's connected to the household. And sometimes in the front of the household, you have these stylish looking doorposts. Sometimes the doorposts would also have these rings. And so this was connected to the entryway. Kind of like, so the doorposts, in other words, these pillars, these bundles of reeds that are connected to Inanna, which is the symbol for her name, represents also an entranceway, a portal, a doorway, or the transition between different worlds. She is the one that opens up different realms, different doorways, different places. And you'll see which doorways she unlocks in a little bit. So there you have it. Unfortunately, this beautiful, oh, by the way, one few other things. Also, you're going to see that there is a man offering her a bowl and a box of fruit and grain. And then there is also a box and a stack of bowls that are on there, which will later, in cuneiform, represent the idea of En, which is the high priest of the temple. Meanwhile, there's another man wearing priestly vestments standing behind him, most likely the king. The vase, of course, is dating back to around 3000 BCE. Now, here we go. The vase, unfortunately, in the year 2003, that sounds pretty recent, this vase, during the conflict in Iraq, was taken away. It was looted out and feared lost forever. And so when the Baghdad Museum was attacked, and but the good news is that later on, after the chaos, there happened to be this Toyota shows up, and three unidentified men in their early 20s show up, and they have the space, and they're about to shoot them on sight. And they're like, no, don't shoot. And then they revealed the vase behind the cloth, although badly broken. And so the vase was returned. It was broken into 20 pieces, but then again, it was originally broken in lots of pieces. And they're able to put it together, and it's back in the museum to this day. So good news for that. All right. Well, so the Sumerians are worshiping Inanna. Then the Akkadians also adopted the worship of Inanna upon their arrival. In fact, King Sargon's daughter, her name is Enheduanna, wrote a work dedicated to the goddess called The Exaltation of Inanna, and wrote this around the 23rd century BCE. This is a personal devotion to the goddess Inanna, and also details bits of Enheduanna's life. Now look at this. Enheduanna is, again, a priestess, and she is writing this work on Inanna. Now, while we do know many figures that, wrote various things, Enheduanna is one of the earliest literary figures when it comes to this poetic form in history. It's a female author, right? One of the earliest that we know by name to write something of this kind of sort of literature. So it's kind of a big deal historically. Enheduanna was charged with the task of reconciling the gods of the Akkadians with that of the Sumerians that were there before them under her father's rule, Sargon. And, she held the office of high priestess for over 40 years. Now, yes, she was the high priestess of the moon god Nana. Okay, and so the moon god Nana was the god of cattle, the moon, and wisdom. By the way, Nana has another name known as Sin or Suin, and that name Sin, the moon god, this name goes into Arabia. And so in Arabia, the moon god is known as Sin, at least in the south. But in the northern section, this moon god is known as a goddess, and her name is Sinai, as in Mount Sinai. Anyway, just a little bit of fun. Okay. So Inanna held this office, as I said, for 40 years. And I do have her work here. I don't want to spend, well, I'll spend a little bit of time on this because it is important to understand now how Inanna is understood. Okay, so the exaltation runs for about 153 lines. And the first introduction gives various names for Inanna. First of all, it says, Lady of all the divine powers. That's how it begins. Lady of all the divine powers, resplendent light, righteous woman clothed in radiance, beloved of An and Uruk, mistress of heaven with great pectoral jewels. That means that she has jewels upon her breast, who loves the good headdress befitting the office of En priestess. That's the name of the priestess, are known as En, E-N, if you're curious, okay? Who has seized all 7 of its divine powers. Now, it says again, my lady, you are the guardian of the great divine powers. You have taken up the divine powers. You have hung the divine powers from your hand. You have gathered up the divine powers. You have clasped the divine powers to your breast. Well, what are these divine powers? What are these 7 divine powers? Well, there are a few things. First of all, they are the gods. They are Anu, Enlil, Enki, Nanhusak, Nana, Utu, and of course, Inanna. But they're also connected to the 7 spheres. We mean she is, in this hymn, the all-powerful goddess. She's supreme. So according to Inanna, there's no other deity above her, and she has all the powers of all the other gods and goddesses of Mesopotamia. Wow. I mean, it's kind of a big deal, right? So the next part of the hymn, it goes into the fact of how foreign lands are scared of her. Wind like Ichor, you roar at the earth. No vegetation can stand up to you. As flood descended upon those foreign lands, powerful one of heaven and earth, you are their Inanna, raining blazing fire down upon the land, endowed with divine powers by An, lady who rides upon a beast. So she is shown as riding upon a beast. You can see how this aspect goes into biblical ideas of the end of the world, the lady connected to a beast, but that's a whole other story. So we will just continue. Raining blazing fire is interesting there. You have the great rights are yours, but lots against these foreign lands who bow down low. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you get the idea. She's pretty fierce. But then it gets more interesting. Okay, so what happens is that she becomes consumed with fighting against these foreigners until she gets this bloodlust and she can't stop. It says, who can cool your raging heart? Your malevolent anger is too great to cool. Lady, can your mood be soothed? Lady, can your heart be gladdened? Eldest daughter of Sun, your rage cannot be cool. This kind of reminds me of 2 other goddesses, Sekhmet, which is in Egypt, and Kali, where she's on the battlefield and she suddenly, as she's fighting against these enemies, suddenly upon her, because the idea of the enemies are the bad guys in this context, she is consumed with this bloodlust and she cannot stop no matter what. Well, what are the response of the foreigners? This is interesting. So, of course, it talks about them being as prisoners and so forth. The typical thing. Tempests have filled the dancing places of their cities. They drive their young men before you as prisoners, yada, yada. The foreign lands are yours. But I want to read one interesting bit. It's a fun little bit. It goes as follows. It says, talking about the foreigners, its women no longer speak affectionately with her husband. At the dead of night, she no longer takes counsel with him, and she no longer reveals to him the pure thoughts of her heart. I'll read it one more time. Its women no longer speaks affectionately with her husband. At the dead of night, she no longer takes counsel with him, and she no longer reveals to him the pure thoughts of her heart. So what's being said here, and it's a kind of a big deal, is that Inanna has this power that connects her to women, where the women look at the man and they're all, I'm not going to listen to you. I'm not going to take your advice. Yeah, I'm not going to no, it's not going to happen. So she has this power over the female aspect. I thought you might find that rather interesting. It continues on, talks about her as being the great queen of queens, issue of a holy womb for righteous divine powers, greater than your own mother, wise and sage, lady of all foreign lands, life force of the teeming people. I want to stop there for a second because she is understood literally as the life force, and that is exactly what she is. She is that vital essence. She is that life force, that which gives life. She is that spark. You guys got it? There you heard that right there and then. Of course, it ends with deep-hearted good woman with a radiant heart. I will enumerate your divine powers, good divine powers for you. And then, of course, goes on to this nice long list of that. There's more, but I don't want to go through it. This is a very long hymn. Although it talks about how Enheduanna was asking for intercession from the moon god Nana because she's being exiled during her 40 years. Apparently, she's exiled. I like this one phrase. She says, I shall give free vent to my tears like sweet beer. I shall give free vent to my tears like sweet beer. I got to use that. I got to use that line, right? Anyway, and she also says, Enheduanna says, because she's being persecuted, and then she gets back to the temple and she takes over again. She says, must I die because of my holy songs? So you could see that Enheduanna, who is this priestess of Nana, that she's writing this song not to the moon god Nana, but to the goddess Inanna, as opposed to Nana. What's happening here is that she's writing these songs that show the superiority of Inanna, and it may not have gone very well with the more patriarchal Akkadians who arrived and took over the Sumerian civilization. She does have some closing notes. She does say, you are the great lady of the horizon and zenith of the heavens. The Nuna have submitted to you. From birth, you are like a junior queen. Now supreme you are now over the Anua, the great gods. And so you have again, she is considered superior. There is this ending section where it says, be it known. This is a repetition, but here it is about Inanna. This is by Enheduanna, and she says this of Inanna. Be it known you are lofty as the heavens. Be it known that you are broad as the earth. Be it known you destroy the rebel lands. Be it known that you roar at the foreign lands. Be it known that you crush heads. Be it known that you devour corpses like a dog. Be it known that your gaze is terrible. Be it known that you lift your terrible gaze. Be it known that you have flashing eyes. Be it known that you are unshakable and unyielding. Be it known that you always stand triumphant. And then, of course, at the very end, It says that she's like the light of the rising moon, giving delight, and that the doorposts greet her. And I like that phrase, the doorposts greet her, because we're back to what we talked about, her symbol, right? Were these reed rings that were used oftentimes for the doorposts. So she's connected to this. So the doorposts, they welcome her. All right. So we have a nice beginning here, right? So let's go a little bit further. You're thinking, can we get any deeper? And the answer is, of course we can, and we are. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you exactly how they worship her. How's that? That's what you wanted, right? Okay. So the worship of Inanna involved many themes and changes throughout history of Mesopotamia. So you have, of course, it does change. Accordingly, the high priestess would choose a young man to represent Dumuzi, her consort, and would then enact what's the hieros gamos, enact the sacred marriage ritual, which was to be the ritual following the New Year celebrations, which is called the Akutu ceremony. Akutu, Akitu ceremony, which is held every year during the spring equinox. Okay, so that's how it goes. Now, so how does this work, right? Well, what happened is that you have a priestess who represents Inanna, and then you have a person who is selected as the consort. Typically, that person is the king of Uruk. But some scholars will say that there are other rituals that will have somebody else as Dumuzi playing this part. But there we go. We have kind of some arguments. But we'll just say for right now, we'll say it's a king in most of those cases, right? And basically this ritual of him having interactions with this priestess who represents Inanna will connect him with the goddess in a sense of creating this agreement between the city, he representing the city, and nature, Inanna representing nature, for the purpose of fertility. Right? That's the point. So there it is. So they establish their legitimacy. They take the place of Dumuzi in the temple for one night. In fact, you're going to have this also during the New Year's festival as well. So the Kutu ceremony, how it works is literally means the beginning of the new year. Okay, so as mentioned, it happens during the spring of the year. So that means that the new year starts at the time of spring and connects to the time of around the equinox. So that's when their new year begins. I know our new year starts in January. Their new year is not that. It's close to the time of the equinox. So if you happen to be Mesopotamian, Sumerian, or Babylonian, or Assyrian, we're close to saying Happy New Year to you. Happy New Year for those who are the ancients who have joined us today. You say Happy New Year back, and we'll get a little scared. But there you have it. So how they start this out is they bring both the upper and lower gods together. These statues are arranged around a table in a position of having a feast during the time of the Akkadians. Marduk returns to the city at night, celebrating his marriage to the goddess Ishtar, but you have variations of this. But here we go. All I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate the ceremony, this celebration, using hymns, using the extant hymns. You'll love this. Okay, so here it goes. So from the extant hymns, first of all, what happens? We know that Inanna, or who is the person who is representing Inanna, the priestess, or sometimes maybe an image too. It was bathed, then she was perfumed, and then she was decked out in jewelry. Meanwhile, the person who represents Dumuzi, along with a procession, are heading towards the shrine. At this time, as this is happening, there are love songs being sung, and we do have many of these love songs that were sung towards the beginning of the ceremony. And then Inanna will greet Dumuzi at the door. Of course, the doorpost is right there because that's sacred to her. And then what will happen, by the way, what I'm saying by that is that she is flanked by her doorposts. So officially, we find this even on the vase that I just mentioned, the Uruk vase. We find other depictions. So it's important that it's seen that she is standing at a door, a threshold. You're going to see this theme throughout various stories of Inanna. So you meet him at the gateposts, and there he presents her various gifts. Then in some cases they sit together on thrones, but in most cases we believe that maybe they sat in thrones, but we know they sat in thrones after the event. But they could happen before, because as you enter, the thrones are there. Maybe they sat down there for a little bit, and then they went to another place, to a ceremonial bed, to consummate the connection through sexual intercourse. And the Uruk vase may represent, of course, the procession leading up to that point. We do have, I'll give you the source, it's called The Joy of Sumer. And it declares in detail a little bit more about this chamber, this bridal chamber ritual, this hieros gamos. It goes as follows. It says, the people cleanse the rushes, these are the reeds, with sweet-smelling cedar oil. They arrange the rushes for the bed. So rushes are placed around the bed. Most likely the ring rush is also there. So the door then, by the way, so therefore the bed kind of forms also a portal. Interesting, right? Between worlds, because it is, between the world of the city-state and nature. It says they prepare a bridal sheet over the bed, a bridal sheet to rejoice the heart, a bridal sheet to sweeten the loins, a bridal sheet for Inanna and Dumuzi. The queen then bathes her loins. It says Inanna bathes for the holy loins of Dumuzi. She washes herself with soap. Well, let's hope so, right? So washes herself, she's clean. She sprinkles sweet-smelling cedar oil on the ground. I kind of give you a lot of details here. The king goes with lifted head to the holy loins. Interesting, right? Right. Dumuzi goes with lifted head to the holy loins of Inanna. That's an interesting phrase, and we'll let your imagination take place there, because that's not saying a typical sexual act. It's a good one, but it's different. And then he lies down beside her. Tenderly he caresses her, murmuring words of love. And this is what he says. He says, "Oh, my holy jewel." So next time with your partner, you can. This is a takeaway here. Just say to them, hey, "Oh, my holy jewel," and say, "Hey, that's what Dumuzi said to Inanna." Okay, cool. "Oh, wondrous Inanna." After he enters her holy vulva, okay, causing the queen to rejoice. After he enters her holy vulva, causing Inanna to rejoice. Yeah, he said it twice. All right. Inanna holds him to her and murmurs, "Oh, Dumuzi, you are truly my love." So there I am, giving you more information than you expected. I'm giving you what I promised, right? So afterwards, pleased by and with her lover. So you can see here from this, in a very obvious way, the Muzi's focus is to please her, not to please himself. She is to be pleased because she is nature. And so she needs to receive uh, that pleasure, that happiness. Okay. So pleased with her lover, Inanna then decrees long life and sovereignty for him and fertility and prosperity for the land. I'm going to continue reading this joy of Sumer. It says, the king bids the people to enter the great hall. So they've emerged out of the ceremony there. The people bring food and offerings and bowls. They burn juniper resin. By the way, juniper trees were holy trees dedicated to Inanna. And by the way, they were also dedicated to Astarte and Asherah. There's a connection there. Also, they perform laving rites, which is bathing rites, and then they pile up sweet-smelling incense. So then the king embraces his beloved bride. Dumuzi embraces Inanna. Inanna then is seated on the royal throne and shines like daylight. Isn't that beautiful? The king, like the sun, shines radiantly by her side. So she sits on the throne first, and then he sits on the throne next to her. He arranges abundance, lushness, and plenty before her. I like that. He arranges abundance, lushness, and plenty before her. He assembles the people of Sumer. I gotta tell you, you want this is what you want to do on your first date. No, this is what you want to do if you want to make your significant other happy. Just say, hey, I'm going to treat you like Inanna today, and you've done your job. If you really do it, that's a good thing. All right. She might also have presented him with a ring, a rod, and line, which is emblems of royal power. Wow. So there you have it. Okay, so the earliest direct historical records of this ritual, yeah, I'm going to give you the name, was from the time of King Shulgi of Ur, 2095 to 2048. We know that he did this, which you just heard, right? But the first ruler named beloved of Inanna reigned in Uruk around 2700 BCE. So we know this ritual went way earlier. That's the earliest name we have. Also certain that at Uruk, the priest ruler, which I mentioned is called an En, spent at least one ritual night in the high priestly residence. By the way, the name of this priestly residence where this consummation happened is called a Gipar. Gipar. I know if you want, I don't know if you want to know the name, that's called Gipar, Gipar. And this is where the marriage was consummated. So you can call your sacred bedroom a Gipar if you want to do anything that is holy there, because that's wholly your discretion. Okay, I'm here all day, guys. Right? Okay, by 2000 BCE, according to some scholars, the monarch of Sumer normally represented Dumuzi as at the right, and this connects again nature with civilization, with the city-state. As I said before, many scholars say that this right was also enacted with those other than the king that was chosen, the end, and we can go through that as well. But there you have it. Now, the text refers to the female participant only as Inanna. Most believe that this was the priestess, the high priestess known as a Nin Dinder. So there you have it. All right. So now around, I wouldn't go into the positions here. I can just talk about this. Around 2900 BCE, Inanna, incarnated as a Nin Dinder, chose the end. And again, once again, the end being the one that's the spouse of the city, who is in turn, obviously, the Muzi. But again, it gets pretty fuzzy because we're up to, again, the controversy. Now, we move through here and we notice that accordingly, taking a look at this, look at the historical background. It looks like, look at all the evidence. It looks like rather than this ritual connected to king making, it was originally connected to goddess making. It's originally connected to Inanna making her a goddess. And then I think what will happen then is that the king aspect takes over. So you're going to have the end, or the Dumuzi, in my opinion, doesn't have to be the king at first. It was selected by the priests, the priestesses of the temple. And then later on, it will substitute that with the king. Does that make sense? You guys got that? So there is, again, a gradual evolution of these positions. But again, I won't spend too much time on that. I do have a nice poem that connects to the holy marriage, another one. It says, my high field, that which is well watered, she says, Inanna says, my own nakedness, a well watered, a rising mount. I, the maiden, who will plow it? Young lady, may the king plow it for you. May Dumuzi, the king, plow it for you. So what's going on here in this poem? Once again, I'll read it one more time. This poem, Inanna speaking, my high field, that which is well watered, my own nakedness, a well watered, a rising mound. You know what that refers to, of course. I, the maiden, who will plow it. Young lady, may the king plow it for you. May Dumuzi, the king, plow it for you. Okay, so basically here, Inanna, her body was identified with the arable land. She is the land's fertility, right? So Inanna's body is the arable land, but it still must become fertile. How does a land become fertile? According to this, as well as other sources, it first must be plowed, right? It first must be plowed. And so this plowing is the act of making love. And so this is the divine love aspect. You guys got that? Makes sense? So it's affectionately known as the plowing process. Okay, well, there is another festival. You guys breathing? Okay, so breathing or breeding? Okay, anyway, so there is also the festival of the princely Inanna, which basically has offerings of dairy products, bread, and wool. There's another festival, not that terribly exciting one. The other one was a little bit more interesting. It's called the Festival of the Evening Inanna, the Evening Inanna, which basically included various sacrificed domesticated animals, and various tools are offered up. There's a hymn that's dedicated to Inanna on this occasion. And yes, of course, I do have the hymn for this evening Inanna. By the way, the evening Inanna aspect is connected to the planet Venus. And it goes as follows. At the end of the day, the radiant star, the great light that fills the sky, the lady of the evening appears in the heavens. The people in all the lands lift up their eyes to her. The men purify themselves. The women purify themselves. The ox in his yoke loads to her. The sheep stirs up the dust in their fold. All the living creatures of the steppe, the four-footed creatures of the high steppe, the lush gardens and orchards, the green reeds and streets, the deep and the living creatures, the numerous people of Sumer kneel before her. Those chosen by the old women prepared big platters of food and drink for her. Apparently, there are these old women, elderly women, that are the ones who arrange these offerings of food and drink. The lady refreshes herself in the land. There is great joy in Sumer. The young men make love to his beloved. My lady looks in sweet wonder from heaven. The people of Sumer parade before the holy Inanna. Inanna, the lady of the evening, is radiant. I sing your praises, holy Inanna. the lady of the evening is radiant on the horizon. So with this particular celebration, you heard the offerings. You have the elder ladies kind of arranging the festivities, but this is another occasion for everybody in the city to uh, uh, make love, to make out. It's another one. So there you go. Although the other ritual we talked about is just the end with the priestess, who's Inanna, or the king, who is the Muzi, with Inanna. So they're kind of watching. In this case, there's more of a participation aspect to it. There is, of course, another ritual. You can figure this one out. There is, which is dedicated to the Lady of the Morning. The Lady of the Morning. Because you know, Venus is the evening star, it's the morning star. And they had another celebration for this. They really had some pretty good celebrations. And this one goes as follows. It says, honored counselor, ornament of heaven, joy of on, when sweet sleep has ended in the bedchamber, you appear like bright light. When all the lands of the people of Sumer assemble, those sleeping on the roofs and those sleeping by the walls, when you sing your praises, bring their concerns to you, you study their words, you render cruel judgment against the evildoer, you destroy the wicked, you look with kindly eyes on the straightforward, you give that one your blessing. My lady is sweet wonder from heaven. The people of Sumer pray before the holy Inanna. Inanna, the lady of the morning, is radiant. I sing your praises, holy Inanna. The lady of the morning is radiant on the horizon. So beautiful, really. It's really, you know, it's repetitious in some ways. It's still beautiful. Did you guys notice the sleeping on the roofs? Did you guys know that in ancient times, sometimes it was so hot, even when it comes to in ancient Israel, people would sleep on the roofs. Yeah, they had a bedroom inside. It does mention no sleeping on the roofs and no sleeping by the walls. But what I'm saying here is sleeping on the roofs was sometimes common because it's so warm, and they'd sit, or I should say sleep, under the canopy of the stars. Let's talk about some priests. Now, there were priests. It's not what you think. Oftentimes, the priests were asexual, or they were hermaphrodites. They were feminine men who were connected to this. Many say that these are the origins of the Gali. In fact, these priests are known as the Gal, which means great, and Lu, meaning man. These great men were considered having magical powers. Sometimes they thought of them more as like sexually ambivalent demons, but anyway. And so they were the ones, the males, who served Inanna. So you have priests who are celibate or asexual or hermaphrodites. They do play the timpanium. They do have cries of lamentation for the deceased Tamuzi, which kind of reminds me a lot of it when it comes to Kibble worship, where they have the Bali, sounds like the same word, who would do lamentations to Attis, right? And also they would have timpanium, same kind of drum. So there seems to be a connection. The Gali are depicted as having intercourse with men, and that's specifically mentioned as well, which is a theme also we see in other contexts. The Galu, there's a story about the Galu, how they meet a mythological lion in this encounter, which could represent the goddess or some kind of aspect, but that's interesting. Later priests of Mesopotamia are called the Kalu, which has an equivalent to Gali as well. And there's a few others. So a lot of scholars would say that the priesthood, or I should say those who, the male priests who are celibate, who remove their genitalia and so forth, that's part of the Kibble worship in Anatolia, it has its origins here in this realm, in the ancient Middle East, and connected to Inanna. And in fact, there's evidence that these Gali, Galu, as they're known here, with the Tabanian, migrated across the southern part of Anatolia amongst those known as the Luvians. We have some records here, and then crisscrossed and went into the Anatolian hinterland, and then that connects to the Qibli worship that we see here, which has the same phenomenon. Of course, Inanna was connected to the planet Venus, which is the morning and the evening star. And as Venus descends and then ascends from the underworld, so does Inanna. So it's interesting because Venus has a dual nature, and so this is oftentimes used to support the idea that Inanna has a dual nature. So she is both a goddess of love, but she's also a goddess of war, right? A dual nature. And so this is the same kind of idea. So a lot of it's interesting because the Quran mentions, because I want to mention this briefly, that there's also references to Inanna as disappearing. Inanna disappears for a period of time. In fact, she disappears for 3 days, but Venus disappears for 3 days too. So Venus is known as a disappearing planet, and so is Inanna known as the disappearing goddess. There's an echo of this understanding in the Quran, where it describes people of Abraham once worshiping the sun, the moon, and the star that disappeared during the night. Of course, it does disappear during the night. It disappears all over the place, right? It's kind of interesting. Now, we're moving on to some of the mythologies here. Here we go. A little bit of course, I'm going to go the full amount of time, so don't worry. I'll give you, I know we started late. Well, let's go into the story of Gilgamesh and the Netherworld. Here, Inanna plants a willow tree in her garden in Uruk, and it's called a hulupu tree. And she intends to make a throne out of it. Now, in some cases, they will say the hulupu tree is a willow tree, but in some cases, they will say that maybe it's more connected to the idea of a date palm, because she was also known as the Lady of the Date Clusters, Lady of the Date Clusters. So while her spouse, Dumuzi, is known as the one great source of the date clusters, but that's actually the name, the one great source of the date clusters. There you go. Now, the story goes that when the separation of the sky and earth occurred, there was a violent, that's where the wind comes from the south, a violent south wind from a storm that uprooted this particular tree. And Inanna rescued it and planted it in her sacred grove at Uruk. Now, this seems to refer to the world tree. The world tree, of course, will connect, right? Realm of the sky, the realm of the earth, and the realm of the underworld. Those 3 realms together. And so when the earth separates from the sky, it knocks this tree out, right? It's no longer able to connect these realms. So Inanna removes it. This kind of tells you, once again, she is the goddess of different portals in different places, right? She connects these realms. And what happens is, she says, I brought it to my holy garden. I tended the tree, waiting for my shining throne and my bed. This is going to be made into her bed as well. 10 years later, when Inanna was ready to cut the tree down, she discovers 3 creatures had settled into the tree. At the base, of course, was a serpent. It says, then a serpent who could not be charmed made its nest in the roots of the tree. At the very top, there happened to be a bird. It says the Anzu bird set his young in the branches of the tree. And in the middle of the tree, there was Lilith. And the dark maid Lilith built her home in the trunk. So you're having a bird at the top, a serpent in the bottom, and this Lilith within the tree itself. You can see once again, you can images of sacred trees, and the idea, obviously, of the sacred tree that connects to the heavens and the earth, the world tree. You can see that oftentimes it will depict the northern part with birds, the southern part with serpents and creeping crawlers. But this Lilith aspect is interesting. And she says, I wept, how I wept, that they would not leave my tree, says Inanna. Since a snake which fears no spell was refused to leave, she asked her brother Utu, the sun god, to help, and he refuses. So she calls upon Bilgames, also known as Gilgamesh, to slay the serpent, and he does so. In fact, he fastens his armor of 50 minas around his chest, and then Gilgamesh then struck the serpent, who could not be charmed. And so what happens is the serpent is beaten, and of course, at that same time, the Anzu bird, who was the servant of the chief god Enlil, from whom Anzu stole the tablets of destiny, hoping to determine the fate of all things, it flies away, and this leaves the Lilith, also known as the Kitsikolilakaka, right? Which is, of course, what does the Lilith do? Some people say it's an owl, but other people say it is the Lilith. What she does is destroy its own home and then sets off into the forest. So there you have it. So the word Lilith, we won't spend too much of time on this because we had another talk on this, and you can look that up. But the word Lilith, Lil means air. For example, Enlil means, which is the Sumerian Lord, means, of course, Lord, and Lil means air, so Enlil. So, but Lilith, or Lilith too, can be referred to as the idea of spirits. It could be an air spirit, it could be a water spirit, but in many cases, she is connected to the south wind. Hey, remember that south wind we talked about? Yeah, and also connected to the moon. Later on, when the Akkadians arrive in Mesopotamia, specifically under Sargon the Great, the word Lilake, standing for Lilith, who's referred to as being a spirit or a daemon, conflates with another word in Semitic known as Lil, which means night. And so now she becomes the spirit of the night with the arrival of the Akkadians. So right here, so now you have this. It's interesting because you have lots of components that connects to almost like the Garden of Eden here, right? Almost like a tree, you got a snake, you got a holy garden. Okay, so there is an association that Lilith is known as the handmaiden of Inanna, or the hand of Inanna. She is also called the beautiful maiden, the perpetual maiden, for her breasts were always barren of milk, as was her womb eternally barren of any child. Like Inanna, Lilith was connected to the ritual prostitution. In fact, she's believed to inspire that activity. Inanna, it says, has sent the beautiful, unmarried, and seductive prostitute Lilitu out into the fields and streets in order to lead men astray. So Lilith was to inspire sexual activity, especially amongst the unmarried. She was not just like Inanna. She was not about marriage. She was not about marital unions. She was about human reproduction. In fact, she is understood, Lilith is understood as the energy of human reproduction, which kind of connects to the idea of Lilith, which is that allure we talked about. Later on, of course, Lilith kind of goes down and becomes a succubus, which are connected to the R.2, which are sexually active female spirits, the succubi, right? But there you have it. But Lilith's association with Inanna is found in many other Sumerian and Babylonian accounts. But again, let's keep moving on. I wish we could talk on this topic forever. Well, let's talk about Inanna in the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now, of course, what happens is that Gilgamesh is the king of Uruk. He's a quintessential hero, and he and his best friend Enkidu set out to find the answer for eternal life. They want to have immortality just like the gods do. And so that's the idea. So, well, I want to tell you this, is that Inanna, she was kind of interested in Gilgamesh. She probably saw that in the earlier story. And so she said, hey, you know what? Let's get together. She proposes to him. Gilgamesh refuses Inanna. This is kind of a dangerous situation. And say, why would Gilgamesh refuse Inanna? Well, Inanna has a lot of chaos. Whoever she gets with, they don't turn out too well. And in fact, Gilgamesh responds to Inanna and says as follows. He says, listen to me while I tell the tale of your lovers. There was Tammuz, the lover of your youth. For him you decreed wailing year after year. You loved the many-colored lilac-breasted roller. I don't know, I'm curious who the many-colored lilac-breasted roller was, but still you struck and broke his wing. You have loved the lion tremendous in strength. 7 pits you dug for him, and 7. You have loved the stallion, magnificent battle, and for him you decreed the whip and spur and palm. You have loved the shepherd of the flock. He made meal cake for you day by day. He killed kids for your sake. Means goats, no, not real kids. You struck and turned him into a wolf. Now his own herd boys chase him away. His own hounds worry his flanks. So not a good record there. You say, I don't want to get involved with you because you basically make your lovers either suffer or die. So yeah, so insulted, she's insulted. You can't win. When a goddess proposes to you, you know, it's over, because if you say yes, it's over, because when she gets tired of you, you're gone. If you say no, it's over. So, well, maybe. So insulted by his refusal, Inanna visits her father, Anu, in the heavens, and demands that she allow her to borrow the bull of heaven, which represents the Taurus constellation. Anu hesitates, stating that it was not Gilgamesh's fault, that she was provoking him. Inanna states, if you refuse to give me the bull of heaven, then I will break the doors of hell and smash the bolts. There will be confusion, mixing of people, those above with those from the lower depths. I shall bring up the dead to eat food like the living, and the host of the dead will outnumber the living. So she's threatening that if Anu, her father, doesn't give her the consolations of heaven, she's literally going to go down and open up the gates of hell and let the dead come out. Which, by the way, she does go out to the underworld. We'll talk about that in a few minutes. Well, guess what? Well, so the bull of heaven is released. Anu says, okay, you can have it. And so Gilgamesh and Enkidu, they encounter outside the walls of Uruk this giant bull. What Enkidu does in this contest is he tears off the bull's right thigh and throws it into Inanna's face. So he tears the thigh off the bull, kind of violent, and throws it in Inanna's face, ow, saying, if I could lay my hands on you, it is this I should do to you, and lash your entrails to your side. Okay, so he's saying, what I want to do is I want to go up to you and I want to take your guts out and put it onto the side. Okay, that's pretty bad. Okay. So what happens? By the way, later on, because of his impiety, Enkidu is killed, and Inanna makes sure that happens, right? You don't say that's what God is no matter what. Well, then what happens is Inanna or Ishtar calls together her people. And who are her people? It's called the dancing and singing girls. Those are her people. The prostitutes of the temple, it says, and the courtesans. Wow. And they all get together and they mourn the bull of heaven. And then, of course, it goes on. There's a custom and all that, but that's the story. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't tell the story, so I better say it. According to one version of the Central Mesopotamian myth, known as the descent of Inanna, Inanna decides to journey into the underworld, possibly the claim of this realm for herself. What's her excuse? Well, she says that she wants to go down because she wants to go for the funeral of Gugalan, who's also known as the Bull of Heaven, who was recently killed by Gilgamesh and Enki. So she's going to go down there. And so, by the way, things more complicated. Meanwhile, Ereshkigal, which is her sister, who is basically, she is the queen of the great place below. She's the goddess of the dead. She's kind of the Persephone kind of figure, and the Greeks and Romans connect her to that concept. Meanwhile, she's pretty upset. She's weeping down in the underworld. And what basically happened is that, she's upset because Ereshkigal's husband or her consort has been killed. So she's upset. There's lots of versions in here, but because in many cases, Virgo is still alive. We'll just keep going. But anyway, she's mourning. She's upset. So in order to pass Elo, Inanna is required to offer either one of her articles of clothing or one of her pieces of jewelry before each of the 7 gates into the underworld. Which is going to be, so what did she do? She's going to make sure that she puts on as much clothes as possible. So she puts on a wig, and then she puts the turban over her wig, and then she puts on a necklace of lapis lazuli, and then she puts beads over her breasts. She wears a pallid dress, a golden ring, a measuring rod, 7 articles of clothing. And so as she goes down each of the 7 gates, she offers each one of these articles of clothing. And by the time she gets down to the bottom, through the 7 gates of the underworld, she has no more clothes left. Each of those articles of clothing also represents one of her powers. So she's not only naked, but she has no powers. It's very vulnerable. But what does she do? After she had crouched down and had her clothes removed, they were carried away, it says. Then she made her sister, Ereshkigal, rise from her throne, who was very distraught and upset at this time, and sat on her throne instead. What? So she makes her sister of the underworld stand up, and then she sits down. It's mine. It's my throne. It's mine. The Anna, or the 7 judges, rendered the decision against her. You can't do this. They looked at her, and it was the look of death. They spoke to her, and it was the speech of anger. They shouted at her. It was the shout of heavy guilt. The afflicted woman was turned into a corpse, and her corpse was hung on a hook. Well, this is a fine mess that Inanna got herself into. So she's judged as guilty. You can't do this. You broke into the underworld, you had no powers, and then you grab the throne from your sister, who's distraught over a loss. Well, again, the husband, in some cases, again, it's her consort, Guglana, which, of course, obviously is connected to the bull. She's upset. So she's distracted. She's not thinking straight. However, what happens is 3 days and 3 nights pass, and Inanna's Inanna has a assistant, a vizier, known as Nin Shabur. This is Nin Shabur means queen of the servants. And what happens is as follows: is that Nin Shabur is going, hey, who I serve is dead on a hook. So she goes to the overworld looking for help. She goes to Enlil, and Enlil says, I'm not going to help her. Right? She goes to the god Nana, who says, the moon god says, no, I'm not. She goes to Anu, who is the dad, and he says, no, I'm not going to help her. Then she goes to Enki, who's, of course, connected to wisdom. And he says, okay, I'll help. And so he creates two asexual figures, one called Gala Tura, the other known as Tura Dara, and he makes them out of dirt. And what he does, he says, I want you to go to the underworld. I want you to appease Erishkigal. And I want to give, I have here the water of life, and I want you to offer it. And to revive, of course, Inanna. So they go down there, and Inanna is revived. And Erishkigal is not really paying attention still. But as Inanna goes out, there are demons that follow her out or guide her out. And they say, by the way, you can't completely leave because you have to be, because of your crime, you have to be replaced by somebody else. Somebody has to take your place. Somebody else has to die. Who that will be, right? So, so what happens is the demons say, well, I guess we'll take Non-Shabur as your replacement. And Inanna says, no, you're not going to take her. She's my trusted vizier. You're not going to take her. And they're so, well, we'll go ahead and we'll take Kara. Who's Kara? That happens to be Inanna's beautician. Inanna has a beautician. And she says, no, you're not going to take her either. Well, we'll take Lalu. And no, you're not going to take her. All of these women except for, of course, Nin Shabur, who was helping out. Others were in mourning. But there was one that was not mourning. There's one who was not mourning, and he probably should have been mourning. And that was Dumuzi, Tammuz, who, of course, was her lover. Okay, so what's going on here? So now we backtrack just a little bit, not too much. Let's talk about Dumuzi or Tammuz. He is a Sumerian shepherd god. He is the consort of Inanna. And the story goes is that Utu believed that Inanna should marry somebody. Of course, you heard how that turned out. Should marry somebody because she was fertile. He states, the brother says, this is what he says to his sister, young lady, the flax is in its fullness and it's lovely. Inanna, the grain is glistening in the furrow. The grain is glistening in the furrow. So what he's saying is you are fertile. You're ready. And so you need to meet somebody, and he also basically says, the wheat is ripe, your lettuce is sprouting, your garden is in bloom. All these interesting references there. So you're ready to go, right? So what happens is that he chooses, of course, Dumuzi. Dumuzi is the one who's going to take care of her garden. So when Dumuzi comes to her door, he bears gifts. And Inanna, he's at the door, runs to her mother, Ningel, and she doesn't know what to do. But Mom reassures her that Dumuzi will be as both a mother and a father to her. And I thought that's kind of interesting. Ningel then declares, open the house. And after getting herself all put together, she opens the door and they see one another, and they both are filled with desire. As a wedding gift, this is something, if you're planning to get married or you have somebody who's getting married, This is your wedding gift. This is the suggestion right here. The wedding gift to her is pails of milk over his shoulders. Isn't that romantic? He arrives with, pails of milk. Here, I got some milk for you. He's like, wow, great, give me milk. The milk is symbolic of something that you all know, so I don't have to talk about. Okay, so he arrives at the house with milk. He's beyond the pale, right? And so Inanna and Dumuzi make love. And since you were interested last time, I'll just go ahead and say how they describe it. It says they press one's neck close to one another, to put one's hands in the other, and to embrace. That's beautiful. Press one's neck close to one another, to put one's hands in the other, and to embrace. She wishes him to undo her barrenness, and then she drinks of his milk, and then he drinks of her. And then they dance, and then he offers his ripened fruit to Inanna. Inanna pours out her ripened fruit to Dumuzi. Starting to blush here. The door to each other's houses are open wide. They call each other brother and sister, terms of affection. I kind of ruined the mood. It's like, your brother seems like a brother sister to me. Okay, whatever. So the marriage is announced. It's going to happen, and so he makes love to her 50 times. A lot of times. This is where it gets a little strange. He makes love to her 50 times, and then he says, I need to be free and be with others. You can see where this is going to go sour. It's like, what? You're with me 50 times, now you want to be free? What are you talking about? And so the two are together yet separate. And so what happens is that, well, you can see where this is going. What happens is that, yeah. And this is where it gets strange in the sense that, maybe it's not strange, but it gets a little, love is over 50 times, and I need to be with other women. I need to be with other people now. And so, but they're still together. And so here it is. So when she is thought dead, he does not mourn her. He doesn't mourn her. And so she notices this. So remember those demons we talked about earlier? They say, hey, we got to take one to take your place in the underworld. And she goes, no brainer. Tammuz, right? Dumuzi, take him. He's going to be the guy. He's not mourning me. In fact, he is depicted as either sitting on the throne or being entertained by slave girls, or he's resting beneath the tree. So she's mad. And so he descends into the underworld to pay the price for her impiety while Inanna is resurrected. Well, guess what? Geshtiana, who is the sister of Dumuzi, who loves him greatly, attempts to save him. And eventually a deal is made. The deal is made that what will happen is for 6 months of the year, it will be Dumuzi or Tammuz in the underworld. And then for 6 months of the year, Geshtiana will take the place of her beloved brother. And so they take turns to fill in that gap. So there you have that. So again, the 3-day disappearance probably represents the 3-day planetary disappearance of Venus, between its appearances as a morning or evening star. And of course, it goes into the consequences of one's actions, right? There's a few other stories, but we don't have a lot of time. But I do want to mention just a few more briefly, and then we will. Okay, so there's another story called Enmerkar and the Lord of Aratta from the 21st century BCE. The story is of the conflict between Enmerkar, who's the king of Uruk, and the king of Aratta, which maybe in some place like Armenia, could be in Iran. And so what happens is that basically, I don't want to read too much of this, but the idea is that Enmerkar believes that Aratta needs to be replaced by somebody who is loyal to the goddess, loyal to Inanna. And so this is kind of how things work. And then what happens is that there's messengers that arrive at Aratta. The king of Aratta replies that submission to Uruk is out of the question because Inanna herself has chosen him to his office and power. So he disagrees that Inanna supports him. The king of Aratta also claims that he has enjoyed sacred marriage with Inanna. But then the herald reveals that Inanna has been installed as queen at Uruk instead. And Enmerkar is saying, no, you're supposed to be under me. And so there you have it. So the reason why I bring up the story, I know you're going, okay, this is really interesting, is that the messenger going between these two towns, he can't remember all the instructions. Oh, man, these instructions are getting longer as this poor guy is going from Uruk to this place somewhere off in Armenia. He's starting to forget, and they think to themselves, according to the story from the 21st century BCE, there's got to be a way to keep this, remember all this information that's going between these two cities. And according to this source, this is where they come up with the idea of writing it in tablets for the first time. That's right. This is the beginning of writing, according to the story, is that they came up with writing because the messenger couldn't remember everything. So they came up with writing so that messages could be written down and then given to the other. And it's so interesting because the first writing was discovered at Uruk and was discovered in that very same temple dedicated to Inanna. So it is very interesting. It's a pretty amazing thing. Now, there's one other story. One of the most important myths involves Inanna that is called Inanna and Enki, which tells the story of how Inanna took the sacred mess, M-E-S, from Enki, who is the ancient Sumerian god of culture. Now, what's a mess? These are sacred documents or tablets that contain all the blueprints for human civilization. So each one of these mess, had different concepts. One represents, when it comes to civilization, victory. Another represents truth or counsel. Another represents technology, like writing, like weaving. Others represent law or priestly offices. And so what happens is Enki holds these powers. And, Inanna, because it's believed that these mess, right, had the power to create these ideas and control them. I know I'm so tempted to go wax philosophical and thinking these are almost like ideals or forms, but that would be Platonism. So we will go there. But it is something. So basically, he has these ideas. They're represented as these mess. Each one is a me. And Inanna, what happens is that she's going to try to take these, right? So according to the myth, Inanna travels from her old city of Uruk to Enki's city of Eridu, and she visits his temple there, and he gets some drinking. He gets really drunk, and it's actually a drinking competition. Inanna apparently is the better drinker, and persuades Enki to through persuasion say, hey, you know what? Why don't you give me these mess? Why don't you go ahead and give me these documents? Well, he does, because he's not thinking straight. And Inanna then flees from Eridu in the boat of heaven. She takes the mess with her, okay, to Uruk. Enki wakes up to discover that they're gone. He's upset, and Enki becomes infuriated. He sends monsters after Inanna, take them back to Uruk, but it doesn't work out. And so she ends up with the blueprints of all civilization. Did I not tell you that she is viewed as the supreme goddess, right? Right? You know, she even takes over the blueprints of civilization. There's another story that's called Shuk Palatuda, who's a gardener who's terrible at his job of gardening. He's partially blind, and he kills all his plants except for one poplar tree, which still stood. And Inanna happens to come around and find rest under the shade of this one poplar tree. So in a sense, she's trying to be nice, but she falls asleep. And unfortunately, this gardener decides to undress her. And so Inanna, he removes the loincloth of the seven divine powers over her genitalia, the girdle of the seven divine powers, and then he accordingly plows her garden. And she wakes up and she's upset because this is a violation. She's furious and she wants to seek justice and places plagues upon the earth. There's a reason why I'm telling you this story. And according to this, all of a sudden, because he did what was taboo to do, and that is to take advantage of a goddess, there was blood everywhere. So the reason why I'm telling you the story, Inanna was considering what should be done because of what happened to her genitalia. She filled the wells of the land with blood. So it was blood that the irrigated orchard of the land yielded. It was blood slave who went to collect firewood drink. It was blood slave girl who went out to draw water through. It was blood the black-headed people drank. No one knew when this would end. She said, I will search everywhere for the man who did this to me. But of course, she could not find him at first. And what does his blood represent? Well, because he did something taboo, she responds with the idea of blood. This, many scholars would say, this represents the idea of menstruation. So this is the bleeding. And of course, according to the Mesopotamian civilization, interacting during the time of menstruation was considered taboo. And so this is the beginning of this taboo idea. I know, not a great story when it comes to, but there you have it, right? Yeah, and so that's the blood connection. By the way, she does eventually find him. And what's going to happen? Well, what happens is that, of course, she says, you shall die. What is that to me? He says, your name, however, shall not be forgotten. Your name shall exist in songs and make the songs sweet. A young singer shall perform them most pleasingly in the king's palace. A shepherd shall sing them sweetly as he tumbles his buttered churn. A young shepherd shall carry your name to where he grazes the sheep. The palace of the desert shall be your home. And it's kind of weird because, he did this terrible act and then there's sweet, happy songs. I mean, what's going on here? I mean, and a lot of scholars, again, argue over this a bit. But the idea is as follows, is that there is still this balance in nature. And this balance in nature is realized that there is life. But to make that balance, there is also death. And so menstruation represents that death, and it is a natural process because what comes after death is in life again, even when it comes to the fields. I know it's an interesting thought, but and of course during times of menstruation, as you will know, what happens during that period of time. The idea is this is the death, this is the shedding of the blood, but there's a promise of new life to come, and hence the idea of the sweet. Okay, now there's other stories. We're not going to tell them at all, but I do want to say there's one story where she challenges the great mountain, and many people believe that this great mountain is actually a dragon at first, that she fights again and she reduces, but then later on this idea of a goddess fighting the dragon, patriarchy takes over, and it becomes a mountain instead. And then, of course, we will close with one last story. This is the last story. I hope you've enjoyed these. The story goes, it's Inanna and Gudam. Gudam is described as a fierce warrior. He dined on flesh and drank blood instead of beer. Gudam walks through Uruk, killing many men and damaging the temple. Then her singer, who is Inanna's singer, comes out and she meets him with a song. She sings, "What you have eaten, what you have eaten, it was not bread that you have eaten. It was your flesh that you have eaten. What you have drunk, what you have drunk, it was not beer that you drunk. It was your blood that you drunk. Gudam, many followed you on the streets of Unnan. They sat armed before you. Gudam continued killing until a fisherman of Inanna turns his axe against him and defeats him. Gudam is then humble and pleads to Inanna for forgiveness, promising to praise her through words and offerings. He did this terrible. Inanna, he says, Inanna, spare my life. I will give you bowls of the mountain. I will make you cow pens full. I will give you sheep of the mountains. I will make your sheepfold full. And Inanna does forgive him, saying, Inanna, he says, I will speak of your heroism and I will praise you. And so the interesting thing about Inanna is that in one case, she seems to be a goddess that is fierce, and there's no forgiveness. At other times, there's forgiveness at what seems to be unforgivable. So she is a goddess that moves, here we go, it moves with nature. Nature cannot be understood. Nature is inherently chaotic. It is pleasant at one time, right? And it is terrifying the next. And she is nature. She is the field that becomes fertile. But in some cases, the crops, they don't come out, right? The harvest is weak, right? And other times the harvest is bounty. And so there's nothing in life that is consistent. And the Mesopotamian civilization, looking at Inanna, realized that yes, she is powerful. Yes, she is great. And she could do wonderful things, but she could also do terrifying things. She is, in many cases, like the power that we see with Sekhmet, or what we see with Kali, where she wants to fight against the enemy, and all of a sudden the bloodlust in, and she loses control. But in other cases, she's the one who gives so much life and so much happiness to the bounty of the earth. She is unpredictable. She is the great goddess, but she is not a goddess of marriage, but she is the goddess of fertility, of reproduction, and physical love. She is the unpredictable goddess. She is the one who gives us passion, but sometimes passion unbridled can be dangerous. Thank you. Right. You wanted specifics? I gave you specifics, didn't I? Maybe too much. But hey, I think I was blushing at one point. I don't use this language. But there you have it, right? and there's parts where I just let your imagination. We figured this out. We're all adults here, so we know exactly what's going on. But it is love, right? And I do like the fact. I think Michael was mentioning this earlier, that people have not changed that much. That we are still the same. We still have these passions, and we still have these desires, and we still please each other in much the same ways as well. So humanity has not changed. And for a while there, I think you can identify, you can connect with the people who worshipped her. So any questions? Or did I, expose everything?
I guess I had one.
Okay.
Professor, you were talking about the winds, to the south wind being the evil one. You have any ideas why they pick on the south like that, or any of the other winds associated with goodness? Conversely,
okay. Yes, the northern wind is good. The north winds are good because they're cooler. The south wind today in Iraq is horrendous. Things haven't changed. Again, if you're familiar with various conflicts in Iraq, or if you've served, if you're listening to this, you served in Desert Storm or other kinds of situations in Iraq, you know that blasted south wind is just the worst. It is, and and the sandstorms cross over. I mean, it's still, yeah, it's a horrendous wind.
So it's a result of kind of where they live, the geography of the area.
It's a geography.
They like the north winds.
Yeah, and like, for example, the evil wind, if you're Etruscan or Roman, it's the wind that comes from the southwest. But that's the evil wind. But in this case, it's the south. Although the southwest wind is not very good either. And of course, think about that wind, it blows over Arabia. And then, it does cover the water over a short period of time. It comes from Arabia, and yeah, it's awful.
The sand, gotcha. So the Vikings would probably worship the south wind.
Yeah, probably, because it warms them up, right? Because
Thank you.
That would be good research to figure that out, right? We want the warm wind. Give us some of the hot wind. Bring it over. Yeah. Good question, Thomas. Any other questions? Yeah.
Well, not so much of a question, but I noticed as you were telling the story, a lot of things that carried over into Christian storylines, the snake and the garden and the, just on and on.
Well, yeah, and of course, yeah, because the reality is that the Fertile Crescent is the Judaism, comes out of that area, and you have Abraham was supposedly from Ur, came over in 1850 BCE and went across and went down supposedly into the Levant and arrived at the Oaks of Mamre and Sheba. But the point of the matter is that Abrahamic aspect, and the name Habaru, which of course Habaru, which is another word for Hebrew. The first time it also appears in texts is from around the 1800s, also in around the southern part of Mesopotamia. And we can actually trace that up into Western Anatolia, and then we find the term being used in the area of the Levant, being used in Canaan. In fact, there's a reference to the Habaru worshiping a god, the god known as Elohim, which of course we know. Yeah, so there's that connection. There's a Middle Eastern connection. There's a lot of legacy from Mesopotamia that goes into the Levant. The Levant, of course, basically is the area of modern geography. It's basically the area of Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and Syria today. In some cases, Western Turkey and the Eastern Turkey and the western section of Iraq. That's kind of the Levant area. And then, of course, next to it is the Fertile Crescent. Right? So there's a blending, but yeah. So
you can see how it all connects.
It all connects, and you have invasions, right? Sargon, Akkad, he had all that region under the Babylonians. It was all under the Babylonians, and then of course you're going to have the same thing with the Assyrians, right? So yeah, so there's lots of connections, lots of crossovers. So Inanna connects to not just Ishtar, but it connects to Asherah in many cases, and Astarte. And then, of course, I didn't talk about this. There's connections also to Aphrodite that crosses over to Cyprus.
Okay. Yeah.
I didn't have time to talk about that. That's toward the end. Time's limited. Is that helpful? Yeah. So yeah, this is the grounds for which, and of course, you do have kind of references to Inanna, and obviously through the great tree goddess of Canaan, right? Asherah. So there is a connection. And you're going to hear that connection. I want to be quiet about it because you're going to hear about that connection next month when I talk about Baal and the gods of Canaan.
Yeah.
So that will be your opportunity to hear about that. But I'm wanting to talk about it, but wait, no. You will listen to the next talk.
Okay. All right.
Later on.
Be patient.
No, it's good. It's a great question. Love it. Yes, Amber. Great question. So
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. Hi. First of all, thank you so much. What a wonderful couple hours. I just enjoyed your presentation. So the question I have is, like, do we know what she did with the tablets that she stole from Enki? Like,
Yes.
What did she do with those?
Well, she became the one who was the supreme goddess over the seven powers. She's in charge of everything, and of course, I didn't quite make the connection, but that's how it's one of the aspects of how she gained these powers. So she
just the powers, not like actual.
Yeah, well, she's in charge of everything. Because actually, I want to keep going.
Lady.
Well, what happens is, remember, she is queen of nature, and you have this marriage between civilization, the city-state, right, and nature through the king, through the Kyroscommos. Well, what's going to happen now is taking over the civilization of the city. Isn't that great? She's taking over. She's taking civilization now. She was nature, and now I'm going, you know what? That's what I like about her. She's like, you know what? I want to take over the underworld. She goes down and tries to take over the underworld. You know what? I'm gonna take over the civilization. Yeah.
And then Babylon, with that whole thing. I feel like that's probably what spurred the whole thing, actually, more than anything. And so I've been doing a lot of studies about Babylon.
Oh, that's great.
And whatnot. So that's the part that really got to me. But man, I have mad respect for this information. Thank you very much.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And when I didn't have time, I had to do a cutoff point. I started getting to the Ishtar materials and went, okay, this is going to be, since Inanna is Ishtar, but if I start going too much into Babylon, which you're doing, that's a whole other talk. So I thought I'm going to stay with Inanna. This talk says Inanna, and I'll do a little Ishtar where I know the legacy connects with Inanna and Ishtar. I know that's the crossover, and then I'm thinking with Ishtar, I'm going, all right, I'm just gonna hold back. So you're part two. Yeah. Any other questions? I had to close the door because the neighbors are telling me I'm being too loud.
I guess I had a statement.
Huh?
I guess I kind of had a statement when you were talking about the Gilgamesh with Enkidu. Something I remember from my class again years ago. I took a Sumerian class, and he's kind of interesting because he was kind of represented as like kind of a hairy beast, almost like a Sasquatch that lived kind of in the fringes of society in the woods. And then somehow he ends up befriending Gilgamesh, which I thought was kind of, so he was kind of like a borderline human / beast.
Yes. Yeah, he was a beast. Yeah, he was, and then they become best buddies. And then, of course, obviously, there's that savage aspect. Did you notice of this?
Yeah, like the wilderness and the savage. Yeah.
And did you notice when he dukes the bull? I mean, talk about savage. he tore its
Mhm.
leg off and threw out her head. I mean, that's
Yeah.
kind of sad. It's kind of savage. And then
And my
what I want to
professor,
do is I want to grab and take your guts out and tie it to your side. So that's a little brutal.
very savage, not civilized.
Yeah, and that was a form of torture, by the way, under that civilization. There was the visceration, the taking the guts out. That was, yeah.
Yeah. And then my professor also insinuated because he translated those tablets for like 20 years in a museum. He could
Awesome.
read the cuneiform. And he insinuated that maybe they were a little more than friends. Enkidu and Gilgamesh. I don't know if there's validity to that.
I've heard
Well,
that.
yeah, you could see that, and the text seems to imply that there is that connection, and that's another reason why he refused the goddess.
Gotcha. Interesting.
Yeah, but and he says, yeah, and also I don't want to be with you because you just killed or maimed or tortured all the other lovers. So
Yeah.
yeah, the timeline.
And a lot of the tablets were broken too, so you don't know not all the information is known to us because the tablets were missing pieces too.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because the timeline is always kind of messed up too, because you're not sure. The Epic of Gilgamesh sounds like that Gilgamesh was the first one, and then later on was Tammuz. In other contexts, is Tammuz or Tamuzi was first, and then Gilgamesh. So kind of like, so the story is kind of like, wait, what? I thought, how can you know when it hasn't happened yet? And so in other cases, it did happen. So it depends on what tablet you get and what city you get it from. But that's a glory of texts. There's no consistent mythology. You have all these variants, and every city has their own special one.
And who translates them?
Yeah, it's competing. Yeah, but you have writing supposedly starts at Uruk in that temple, and I think it's interesting they have a mythology or a story about the beginning of writing. I thought that was really clever. Wow.
Yeah,
cool.
very.
Yeah. Thank you, Amber. Any other questions? And thank you, Margie, for your question too. Well,
I'm gonna get out of here. I'm on the east coast, so
thank you, Thomas, for being here so late. Yeah, thank you, Thomas.
You're welcome. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Right. So I guess I'll just say farewell. And if you're Sumerian, you're Babylonian, happy close to New Year. And we'll take it from there. Have a great night.